One of the people who once said that football is simple, but that simple football is the most difficult thing to play in the world, was Johan Cruyff. He was discussing the game, yet there was a man on the other side of the world of football, not that he was a poet of the pitch, but that he was a general of the dugout, and he knew the same principle as well as Cruyff himself. And he was to add to it a trophy-hoarding lifespan and supremacy as great as any ever witnessed by the game. His name was Alexander Chapman Ferguson, and he is the most successful manager in the history of football. Alexander Chapman Ferguson was born on 31st of December 1941 in the Govan district of Glasgow. His father was employed in the shipyards, and his mother brought him and his younger brother Martin up in a small flat at 667 Govan Road. Govan was not a locality that relished gentleness. It was a society constructed of hard work, industrial grime, and close-knit working-class pride. And it made Ferguson what no coaching textbook ever made him. He began his employment as a toolmaker apprentice, and then football took all. The ideals he picked up in these streets, the industriousness, faithfulness, a kind of violent impatience with mediocrity, would later be the keystone of the most illustrious managerial career the sport had ever known. Ferguson started his career as an amateur player with the Queen's Park Club, where he first joined as a striker when he was 16 years old. He was not a dazzling player who wowed with grace, but he was quick, focused, and he got goals. He scored 20 goals in 31 games in Queen's Park, but was unable to win a regular spot in the team. Transfers ensued to St Johnstone and to Dunfermline Athletic, where his ability was indeed getting its first foothold. He was a contender for the leading scorer in the league, scoring 31 goals in the 1965-66 Scottish League season, which earned him the notice of his hometown team. In 1967, he moved to Rangers at a record fee of £65,000. It was time of the height of his playing career. Rather, it turned out to be a bitter experience. He had left unfinished business smouldering inside him, and his politics and personal tension had haunted his stay at Ibrox. The fire, which was not to be put out, was eventually going to drive something much bigger. The first managerial job occurred soon after his last appearance in the field, when, in the summer of 1974, Ferguson was contracted to manage the Scottish Second Division team East Stirlingshire. At 32, he was earning a reported £40 a week, and already he was intolerant of anything less than complete devotion. He was already known as a disciplinarian when he took on the management of St Mirren in 1974, and during the period of 1974 to 1978, he turned around the club, having found young talent that led the club to become league champions in the First Division. And that St Mirren team was only 19 years old on average. Ferguson was not just running the company, he was already starting a company on the ground floor, shopping for young talent, setting standards, and expecting his players to have the same kind of ravenousness that was in his heart. In 1978, he was presented with an even bigger challenge. By this time, Rangers or Celtic had won the Scottish League for 15 years in a row. Ferguson entered Aberdeen and proclaimed, in effect, that this should not be the case anymore. His players referred to him as Furious Fergie. During his tenure, Aberdeen enjoyed the most successful spell in the club's history, taking 3 titles in the Scottish Premier Division, 4 Scottish Cups, and the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1983. It was that European prize that was the jewel of the Aberdeen age. They beat Bayern Munich on the way to the final, and then beat Real Madrid 2-1 in Gothenburg on 11th of May 1983. Aberdeen was the 3rd Scottish club to take home a European trophy, and it also saw the beginning of Ferguson as a manager of the highest calibre. The club that was considered the most potent in European football had been defeated by a team in the northeast of Scotland. The football world awoke and took notice. The call from Manchester United came in November 1986. The club was a sleeping giant, a name of gigantic history, which had not won the English League title within almost 20 years. The club under Ferguson was initially inconsistent, as it was ranked 11th, 2nd, 11th and 13th during the first 4 seasons of his leadership of the club. The pressure was tremendous. About his future, there were whispers on the part of journalists. Fans grew restless. There was division following 3 seasons without trophies, and it is argued that Ferguson was a match short of the sack in 1990. That match followed in January of the same year, an FA Cup third-round match at Nottingham Forest. United won 1-0. It was an outcome that left an imprint on the history of English football. The first silverware Ferguson won as a United boss was in 1990, when the club was the winner of the FA Cup. It was the starting point of all things. It was not only the beginning of a dynasty, but also the beginning of a change in the identity of a club. At the core of that change was the firm faith about youth held by Ferguson. He also introduced a system that led to the emergence of a group of young talents who made it to greatness and became known as the Class of '92, which included David Beckham, Ryan Giggs, Paul Scholes, Gary Neville and Phil Neville. They were not just good footballers, they were the products of a philosophy, young men who had been made under the same ruthless criteria that their manager had been taking since the streets of Govan. They were all training, all the misery, and finally, all the victory. Giggs had been in the club since the age of 14. Scholes was a Salford mute genius. Beckham possessed an instinct of the great moment that was on the verge of the supernatural. They all made up one of the most iconic teams of players that have ever existed in English football. The first title was finally won in 1993, and United ended the season 10 points above second place Aston Villa. It also marked the first ever Premier League season, and United became the first champions. There came more titles in quick succession. 11 seasons of Premier League championships between 1992 to 93 and 2002 to 03. 3 FA Cups won in the process. The competitions of this time were brutal and characterizing. Arsene Wenger came to Arsenal in 1996 with his own idea of how football should be, and the struggles between these 2 clubs, between these 2 men, took the whole Premier League to new heights. Jose Mourinho would follow, just as aggressive, just as unready to give an inch. Ferguson flourished in such battles. Competition did not just fit him, but appeared to be necessary. Then followed the season that rendered the legend immortal. In 1998-99, Manchester United became champions of the Champions League and won the first treble, or domestic league, domestic cup, and continental championship in the history of the English football game. The best known of the never say die spirit that Ferguson had instilled into the DNA of United was the 1999 Champions League final in Barcelona, in which United was losing Bayern Munich 1-0 with just a few minutes of stoppage time remaining. And then the goals of Teddy Sheringham and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer in 3 incredible minutes brought about a historic triumph. Critics were at a loss for words. Protagonists, on the other hand, could not be consoled. Ferguson simply smiled. He had never thought it impossible. It was his own powerful asset, the ability to believe in his team, to believe in it unswervingly, almost irrationally, that they would come up with a solution at any time of the day. Later that year, the Queen knighted him for his services to football. Ferguson rebuilt again, as he always had. The 2003 purchase of a teenager in Sporting Lisbon, named Cristiano Ronaldo, was perhaps one of the most important signings of his later years. The next teenager to come the following year, Wayne Rooney, would also become a legendary player of the club. The second Champions League win came in 2008 in Moscow, and the Premier League titles were piling up. Having not won a league championship in 3 years, United subsequently won 5 Premier League titles over a 7-season period between 2006 to 2007 and 2012 to 2013. It was during that final season that he won his final Premier League title and retired at the top of the English football ladder. The figures, as they stand on their own, are nearly unbelievable. He won 38 trophies during his 26-year tenure with Manchester United, including 13 Premier League titles, 5 FA Cups, and 2 Champions League titles in Europe. He was the winner of Manager of the Month 27 times and Manager of the Year 10 times. His total number of matches handled was more than 2,150, and his winning percentage stood at 58, making it hard to condense what he accomplished to a few lines. But statistics, however awful, can never be used to describe to the full extent what was unique about him. It was the culture he had invented, one in which standards were not to be compromised, in which young people were to be believed, in which no lead was safe until the final whistle, in which defeat was not to be condemned, but to be told. Not just the amount of trophies he won made him a legend of the most successful football managers in the history of British football, but also the way he managed to change the club and make it one of the best teams of all time in the world. He left his fingerprints all over the world on the players he created: Giggs, Scholes, Beckham, Ronaldo, Rooney. His philosophy was disseminated on continents by the coaches whom he directly and indirectly influenced. Pep Guardiola, a student of Cruyff, frequently admitted that Ferguson has left a dark cloud on the whole profession of managers. They were not the same men, they were not similar philosophies, but they both knew that the best teams were not built, they were nurtured. Sir Alex Ferguson grew up as a boy in a shipyard town, and he had made the architect of an empire. He never stopped believing, and finally, the game never had a way to stop him.